pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Glassbog?
Here.
Mrs. Hoskins?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. McGovern?
Here.
Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Mrs. Schott? And Mr. Representatives.
Here.
Thanks.
And if you could please call the calendar.
Thursday, January 11th, 2018 will be Dialogues and Democracy Night at 6:30 to 8:30 at the high school. Monday, January 15th is Martin Luther King holiday and schools and offices are closed. Tuesday, January 23rd, there will be a school committee business meeting.
Thank you. First items on our agenda are two presentations. First on the site conditions and constraints. Mrs. Giddey, if you want to.
Right. So I'd like to introduce to you Jim Partridge, who you remember, he's our architect extraordinaire, and David Potter, who you remember from the Park Corporation from the athletic complex presentation. So they're going to go over tonight with you some of the constraints of 3 different sites when looking at expansion or possible new siting for a school. And that would be Wickford Middle School, the high school complex, and then Davisville Middle School. We have contracted with Jim and Dave to take a look and just basically talk about some pros and cons, and then if you have any questions about this information, they can present that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so obviously we look at the Wickford Middle School, which currently is located along Tower Hill Road and Phillips Street. It's centrally located within town, which is a good thing. There is plenty of open space located on the the Tower Hill Road side of the building, which also lends itself to be able to plan a new facility on one side of it, and obviously build the new facility on the site, and then decommission the existing school, which has kind of served its purpose, being the original senior high school, and then some multiple additions that we've done over the years.
Sure. So we prepared the attached site analysis maps just to kind of give you a broad view of what's out there for existing conditions. And the red line shows the property boundaries. On the west side, the left side of the drawing, you see Tower Hill Road. On the south side is Phillips Street. And there are 2 curb cuts accessing the property, both two-way, one on Phillips and one on Tower Hill. The building sits on the east side. We have shown over here, there is some wetland area here. Those are shown highlighted in green. There is a little bit of flood zone that's off the property. That wouldn't be a constraint really for this facility. Parking, there's some parking in the rear of the building, and then ball fields out on the west side. Topography, slightly slopes from the southwest corner up to the downhill to the northeast corner of the site. There are definitely some existing there's some utilities serving this building. Most of them come in on the northern side of the site. You've got your water, your electric, gas as well. Yeah. And then the existing, there's no public sewer available, obviously. As many of you are aware, there is an existing septic system. It's on the east side of the existing building. So that's something to consider as you look at different alternatives and what potential this site could have. Two other items. Traffic is a consideration for this site. You get quite a backup at Tower Hill Road. Many people here are familiar with, even on Phil Street during the peak hours, particularly the morning peak hour, where school students are arriving. So that's something that would need to be taken into account. There was discussion with some of the facility members about some fill that happened on the west side of the site.
Some of the history that we got relative to the site, that the sort of the west side of the property where the ball fields are was somewhat of a swampy type of a land feature, and over the years it was kind of filled in with whatever was available to make it level and for play fields. So that's that's something that would have to be investigated a little bit further if, in fact, that this site would be, looked at a little harder relative to the construction. We would have to get some under grade type of information in terms of borings and some test pits and things of that nature to get an idea of sort of what we're up against before we even actually start on trying to design something like middle school.
Any questions on that?
The septic capacity is?
Septic capacity, the system appears to be pretty old. The record drawings we found, I don't have a date on, but it's a pretty old system here. So I don't know that what's there would meet with current DM OWTS regulations. I don't know if it would be able to be if you were to do a new development or addition or whatever it might be, I don't know if you can keep the existing, septic system.
And what would be the feasibility of adding additional traffic routes into the site?
You mean new curb cuts or different locations?
Well, I think one of the things you want to stay away from is obviously the intersection of where the two major avenues come together. So, I think right now they did the best with what they could do relative to the existing school the way it was laid out. Coming off Phillips Street is the primary entrance, and then obviously they used 10 Town Road to be able to access off of the site to stay away from that intersection as much as possible. In terms of planning for the future, obviously we have to take a hard look relative to where the bus drop-off would be once we have a layout relative to the middle school. I would say it probably would be interior relative to keeping it away from the main roads.
Yeah, both are roads maintained by DOT, so it would be coordination with DOT on where those curb cuts and any revisions to those go through that permitting process.
Yep. Can you talk a little bit about what you would foresee for fields on this property? Right now, we have a building for 450 students or so, and their staff, the teachers and support staff at the building. So, and the parking that goes along with that. So now, if we utilize this for a North Kingstown Middle School, we could be looking at 1,000 students and the teachers that go along with them. I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are on what size field space we would have there to work with.
I think you're definitely going to be into multi-purpose type fields, whether that be sort of football, lacrosse, type of thing where it's kind of like multitask. We really don't have the flexibility to be able to spread out and have the space available to do multiple type sport scenarios. So that would be sort of a downside relative to the site.
Yeah, the site space is, because right now we look at it, there's a big field on the west side, so it looks like there's a lot of space. You really want to look at what the building shape would be, how much area that would take up, maybe a certain number of floors, parking that's required, and typically the next item that takes space, stormwater management areas, and then athletic fields as well. So all those will kind of, vie for position on the site, and figure out how much is left over for your athletic program.
And the footprint you have there is for a 2-story building?
Yeah, again, it's more to be meant as a sort of a placeholder fill before we can actually start developing, how we would actually configure the different spaces. I can see that this building could ultimately be a lot bigger on the first floor and not so much on the second floor, and try to utilize the roof of the second floor to kind of keep the building down. Because we really don't have the luxury of spreading this building out.
Just thinking in terms of, that point with the fields and all, is any of you thinking about like a 3-story option? Like the high school is 3 stories, for instance, and the current building is 3 stories.
It's not ideal, quite honestly, especially on the middle school side of things, but there could be a potential of having some of maybe I call it the old industrial arts, but maybe the maker type spaces that could be used for something like that for, coordination and gathering, sharing
Did you look into the feasibility of tying into the sewers? Like, how far is it to go down Village Street to, I think there's gonna be sewers at Woodford L, or to go north to that one-way street where the sewers go through to the library, or whatever the town's future plans are for sewers?
We didn't look at offsite improvements to bring sewer, public sewer to the site, but that's a really good point. I think, when you start with the permitting process with OWTS, one of the first things that you would be asked is it feasible to connect to a public sewer system? Certainly that's the better option for the environment, and it can help save some space and hopefully some cost. It depends on how far away that connection point is, and how, which way the gravity's flowing, where topography lands. But it's certainly something that should be looked at when you're getting into that. We can get to that level of detail.
Okay. All right.
So the next site, high school site.
Again, we're obviously looking at incorporating a brand new middle school with the existing high school that's currently there, and trying to figure out sort of the best placement for the new middle school. So we've located it, if you want to straight up, sort of in the northeast corner of the site, to try to avoid as much of the activities that are currently on that property. And we lose obviously the baseball field on that side, but the access relative to that school versus the high school, we try to separate the two entities as much as possible in terms of circulation, because we know for a fact that there is a lot of school activity in terms of student parking that's around the D building, which is the school administration side of things, right where Dave is indicating. So that whole area would sort of have to be looked at relative to circulation and how we reconfigure that for future planning. But right now, obviously, when that building was put in, it was designed when it was sort of like an open campus style originally, which obviously is not the case anymore.
You can see on the plan here, we're showing some of the former building locations. The athletic field area shows looks like a really big area that's easily developed into a new school site. But there is also underground septic system that was constructed for the high school. The leaching area is in that zone, so that's something that would have to be worked around.
And we also have to consider relative to the removal of those buildings that were done 17, 18 years ago, a lot of field material was actually employed and brought on or reconfigured onto that space. So it's not mature virgin soil conditions that we're dealing with at this particular site that we would have to deal with and consider in terms of the design of the building.
And so it's something we want to look at in the earlier design phases, just to make sure you understand what costs might be associated with demolition. Sometimes buildings are demolished, they're actually just buried in place, crushed and buried, and some additional work costs might be incurred. So getting a good handle on that early on is really, it's important to really capture how much cost the whole project would be. And then certainly parking would be another question here. Where would that fit on the site? Jim alluded to some improvements on this area here. Right now, the students are parking, off the pavement, kind of on the walk a little bit. So certainly something that kind of services the.
And we also have wetlands that are sort of to the east and to the south of this property that's going to eliminating us from, extending back behind the existing high school. Just don't have that luxury in this particular site.
Yeah, and I'll just note, we took the state GIS wetlands data that was available, and then we had our wetland scientists go out to the site and walk each of these locations, all three sites, and pencil in where they saw, based on landmarks and what they saw in the area map, where that wetland edge is. So it's more accurate than what you're going to see at the state GIS level. So it's a more realistic picture, I think, of where the wetlands are. This was actually flagged last year or the year before for the other project, the athletic field project. So we're very confident in the location of that line. And you can see the 50-foot perimeter wetland just creeping into the portion of the developed area here, and then also here. So.
At one time, not too long ago, there was some discussion relative to developing sort of the far east, sort of on the south corner that Dave just had his cursor on for additional parking for maybe juniors of the high school, but the wetlands is kind of prohibiting us from doing something like that.
Yeah, and just to talk about the wetlands a little bit more, there is a stream, I think, here, and then that empties out into this larger wetland complex. There is some flood zone that's out here as well. That it's not within the developable area, but it's just something to be aware of. I would really see that as a barrier to construction and development of the site. I know there's been some talk about one of the benefits of this site is the location. You compare, compared to the other.
Yeah, obviously, you're not on busy roadways. I mean, the time it's busy is when school is actually, going into session or they're leaving, but for the most part, just the traffic patterns on Fairway Drive is really minimal for the most part.
Yeah, the roadway does have some curvature, so site distance is something that you look at, but that's something that's easily tackled.
Any questions on this site? Would the siting where you have it now necessitate either eliminating the current D building we have and/or the impact of the current town hall location building as well?
In the T building.
Yeah, the D building and the town.
We certainly would consider doing just that. I mean, obviously, the D building was built in 1971 for, at that time, an elementary school atmosphere. I think readily to offices. We certainly could look at sort of relocating those kind of activities to another area, whether in the existing building, the high school, or for that matter, we could actually build offices into the middle school to kind of help create a plan that, kind of is suited for both conditions.
Yeah, I think the same kind of analysis with balancing the building footprint, the number of floors, what that footprint looks like, how much parking you're going to really need. Because I think you're a little short on parking, probably at the end of the semester when all the students are getting their licenses. It's probably worse, end of the year rather. And then balancing all that with even the athletic program, you've got a substantial amount of athletic activities like that you would be losing some of those as part of that. So you have to look at that. We talked about putting some throwing events in that field out here. That might be an area that's eaten up by some parking or some other portions of the development.
And then just sort of getting into the area where you get athletic fields that are serving just the high school currently, and the middle school would be, I'm sure, asking to share those kind of spaces, which obviously is not ideal.
Thank you. And I think you have one more site.
We do.
The last site is not primarily to look at it from a middle school or a new middle school, but we looked at it relative to its size, its location, to consolidate some of your elementary facilities, primarily the Fishing Cove and Forest Park elementary schools that currently exist, and whether or not we could actually take those two elementary facilities with population and inhabit the Davisville Middle School. First of all, the building size as it stands right now is plenty big enough. The building is a structural steel frame building, so a lot of the masonry walls that you see in that building, they're not load bearing. They're just basically durable party walls that kind of separate education versus circulation for the most part. So there is flexibility in terms of redoing the interior of that building to make it so more suitable for the 21st types education activities. The core activities as they stand right now in terms of the cafeteria, the media center, they're grossly undersized even for a middle school, and they're sort of small for elementary level in terms of population that would be going into that school. So we would probably look at entertaining a couple of small additions for both of those areas. And it is doable. And there's obviously plenty of parking around this particular building, and you just happen to be adjacent to a town recreation area that can serve as recreation space for elementary type of pupils.
Questions? Anybody on this side? Okay, thank you. Anything else? Just want to comment briefly, just for people watching. What we're looking at here, we should have said it more at the beginning, is very, very preliminary, but yet sort of the baby steps towards coming up with, real locations for future school buildings. And the first step to doing that was to have our professionals, take a look at the feasibility of whether, these various sites could accommodate some of the ideas that have been out there. But, when you see building locations on the map or dotted lines, we are very, very far, and as our engineers and professionals mentioned, there's been no, actual site work, and there'd be a lot of steps forward from here, but you have to start somewhere, and this is basically it.
Well, and it's great because it's helpful that, like you said, you see it on the map, and we know there's a wetlands issue at the high school, so there's no more questions of why can't you do this and why can't you do that. So it's on the map to answer some of those questions, so that, takes it a little step further.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
So the next item on the agenda is the presentation on the North Kingston High School 2018 and 19 program of study.
Thank you. And Dr. Morse, Dr. Barbara Morse, the Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning at the high school, is here this evening to walk you through some of the updates. There aren't too many updates to the program of studies. You'll remember that last year there were probably a lot more things that were going on with personalized learning. We have had some discussions, particularly with Mr. Jones, about looking at some of the criteria for, say, graduation requirements and receiving credit for different experiences, things like that. So we're not quite prepared with that piece of it tonight, but we anticipate coming back to you in a few weeks or so with something more on that piece. But I'll ask Dr. Morse to talk a little bit about what has changed in this year's program of studies.
Well, most of the changes that we've made this year are in relation to tweaking things to fit the current CTE programs that we have and those that we're in development of. So, for instance, we found that with the Intro to Earth and Physical Science courses, the emphasis needed to be more on the physics for the career tech students that are in the engineering and robotics program. So we developed a course that is similar, it meets all the same requirements as the Intro to Earth and Physical Science, but it's more heavily on the physical science rather than the earth science, so that the students have that experience going into the physics portion that they're required to take for the career and technical. So it was programs like that and developing keyboarding for the fine arts CTE that we're in development for needed to be put in. Some language, some things we learned when we went to the 8-period schedule. Some things we hadn't anticipated fully was that, for instance, students didn't used to be able to drop or withdraw courses because there was no place for them to go. Now that we have a PLT, if a student elects to withdraw a class, or if it's their best interest to withdraw from a class, we can put them in a PLT and have a place for them to be productive and supervised and take an alternative course.
Could you just tell me what that acronym stands for? Because I don't know that one. So.
Personalized learning time.
Thank you.
When we put 8 periods in, that allowed for us to say, our expectation was still that students would take 7 credits, but that 8th period was more of a flex time for students who, with the career and technical programs, they had a conflict. They couldn't fit band and the CTE requirements in, so they had to make some tough choices. And we wanted to open it up a little more for flexibility, so the students can now fit in those 8 courses that they want to take. Or they can just utilize that time to work on online classes that they're taking outside. They can use it for study time. They can use it to meet with a teacher. So there's a lot of uses for that time. So we call it personalized learning time. Now, if a student withdraws from a class, they don't have to be sitting in the guidance office. They could actually be with the teacher and working on something. So what we had anticipated was, how do you translate that? Because it's something that didn't really happen frequently before. Not that it happens frequently now, but it was very rare that happened before. And now it's a little more flexible for the students. So we put in there, the language about it actually generates a withdraw on your transcript. Withdraw pass, if you haven't been passing, or withdraw fail if you're not. So it was those kinds of things. And then the inclusion of the seal of biliteracy information that came in late last year after the program studies went in. And now the Department of Education requires us to tell students early in their freshman year what the required graduation requirements are for them for the 4 years that they're going to be there. So, and that, tweaks that happen over the summer changes. We sent out a notification, but now we're putting it in the program studies. So we're a little ahead. So that was the essence of what has changed.
Any questions from members? Thank you very much.
And I assume that we'll be meeting to talk about those other issues that have come up. So, and it's a discussion that we welcome. We're always looking to for feedback and for making a wider perspective to make things better for the students.
Thank you. Next, we have on our agenda citizens' comments. I have a sign-up sheet. If there's anyone who wants to speak who didn't sign up, when I'm done with the list, just wave your hand and we'll certainly accommodate you. I'd just like to remind everyone, please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and the school committee cannot respond to items that are not on our agenda, but we're here to listen to you. First person is Joseph Baker. Can you please come to the microphone and state your full name and address, please? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Baker. I live at 209 Edmund Drive in North Kingston. Good evening, Superintendent Ogier and members of the school committee. My name, as I just mentioned, is Joe Baker, and I'm here tonight to discuss the ongoing conditions at Knesset Elementary School. My wife, Rebecca, and I, who's here, have 2 children who began attending the school 3 years ago. We actively chose the school our children attend and see the diversity at Knesset, along with its suburban setting, as its greatest asset. During these 3 years, we have witnessed the most professional and dedicated staff that can be imagined give their expertise, time, and care to all of the children at Knesset. However, over these 3 past years, we have observed a worsening trend with behavioral issues that have gone well beyond disruptive and have now become concerns for their physical safety and as to whether their educational needs are being met. Several weeks ago, after the most severe situation occurred, my wife and I, as well as Amy and Brad McCoyle, who are also parents of 2 children at Knesset, met with Principal Dennett and later that day with Superintendent Ogier. And each of you were sent a copy of a letter that I sent to Dr. Ogier as well. The common theme from each of those discussions was that they did not have the capabilities or resources needed to truly meet the needs of all the students at Knesset. We come to you tonight to make sure that you are aware of these conditions, to make sure that you know that we expect better for our children, and to respectfully request that adequate and appropriate resources be provided to Knesset. No child should ever be bullied at school. No child should ever feel anxiety about attending school. And no child should ever be urinated on by another student at school. Let me repeat that last sentence. No child should ever be urinated on by another student at school. Rebecca and I are in the unenviable position of being the parents of the student which that happened to. I would like to stand here and tell you that these behavioral issues are isolated and that everything is normally okay. But that is not. That is what's most disturbing. It's not. Just in the past several weeks of having open conversations with a variety of other parents from Knesset Elementary, we have learned of continuing bullying, kids being bullied, harassment, and abuse, hitting, name-calling, and mean-natured statements being made. These actions have become the norm, and we see firsthand that the dedicated staff at Knesset is not enough for dealing with the current conditions. Knesset is a unique learning community with a wide range of social and economic backgrounds. And as has been presented to you previously by Dr. Ogier, these performance indicators also mean that additional support is necessary to ensure that each student is provided the opportunity to succeed. Aside from the obvious expectation for the physical and emotional well-being of our children is their right to a quality education. While the existing staff is dealing with the adverse behaviors, the remaining students receive less attention, less instruction, and ultimately are deprived of receiving the level of education that they deserve. We are demanding a safe school environment for our children, and currently the town of North Kingstown has failed at providing that. We recognize the budget constraints, limits on increasing school budgets, and that there may be somewhat similar needs occurring district-wide. However, let me return to the situation which occurred to our child last month. While in the school library, another student exposed himself and urinated on our child. Mrs. Dinant and Dr. Rozier both told us that in all their years of education experience, they had never witnessed such an egregious act. While I am sorry that this act occurred, especially to my child, please let it be an example of how poor the conditions at Quidnesset are, something no performance indicator or metric can be used to describe. Please take this incident as the point of no return, that you will not let something even remotely like this happen to another student or professional at Quidnesset Elementary. I stand before you tonight to make sure this disgusting behavior never happens again, and respectfully request that you provide the resources to Quidnesset to ensure that this Title I school is safe and that each student has the resources available to them to be a success. This does not mean reallocating existing resources. That only diminishes the education experience for the majority of students. The existing staff is doing everything they can to keep conditions as safe as possible, but as I have already said, that is not enough. While I am not a professional educator, we are seeking your consideration of the following: additional social worker support and the assignment of a dean of students for Quidnesset Elementary. We look forward to your response to resolve this issue, and I understand you can't ask me any questions, but I am happy to try to answer any questions that you may have after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the only person who's signed up for citizens' comments. Is anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak?
Excuse me, I just wanted to, I have copies of my
Yeah, I was
statement.
actually going to ask if you
believe
could. If you could give me the clerk, Mrs. Healy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, for our next items on the agenda, we have our routine items. First, with respect to our executive session, if I could ask for a motion to seal the executive session minutes of January 9, 2018. We have a motion from Ms. Hoskins, second as well, and, oops, that's right. Ms. McGovern, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that is unanimous. I can disclose that no votes were taken in tonight's executive session. Next, I need a motion to approve our business meeting minutes of December 12th, 2017.
Second.
So we have a motion, Ms. Huskins, Mr. Jones.
Excuse me, are you doing all the consent agenda?
Oh, I jumped a step. My apologies. Sorry, I went too far. So back that up. Would you want to withdraw your motion?
Yes, I will withdraw my
Okay.
second.
Sorry about that. So, we've reached the consent agenda. Does anyone want to exempt any items on the consent agenda? Ms. McGovern?
B1.
B1. Speaking of B1. Anyone else? Okay, hearing no others, if I could have a motion to approve the non-exempted consent agenda items.
Second.
I have a motion, Ms. Hoskins, second, Mr. Jones. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. The exempted item was item B1. If I could have a motion to approve item B1.
Motion to approve item B1.
Motion, Mr. Jones. Second, Ms. Hoskins. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And one abstention from Ms. McGovern. Passes unanimously except for the abstention. Next, we have unfinished business. Sorry, program of studies, E. Going too far again. We just heard the presentation on the 2018-2019 North Kingstown High School Program of Studies. I could ask for discussion purposes for a motion to approve item E1.
So moved.
I have a motion, Ms. McGovern. Do I have a second? I'll second it. Seconded. So, discussion. Any discussion?
I'm not ready to approve it as written, so
Okay, do you have specific, I know you have some concerns, but one question would be, when does it need to be approved by?
The sooner the better. We don't have a printing schedule anymore because this is on
elections first week of February, so.
So,
Getting
we're
close to
right
it.
up there. Do you think you could iron out concerns in the next?
I have no
next
issue with
meeting?
the course elections.
Right, but I think we need to take it as a whole and not piecemeal. I mean, that would get a little tricky. That's what I'm thinking, if maybe we gave you 2 more weeks to have some
Sure,
more
yeah,
discussions.
that'd
at
be
the
great.
next meeting, if that is
We're
doable.
back on the 23rd with some more.
So, with unanimous consent, we could withdraw the motion on the table, which was a move to approve. Any objections to withdrawing the motion on the table? I hear none, so we'll withdraw that. And if I could have a motion to table item E1, just to give a little time to work out a couple of details. A motion to table, sorry, I need a second? Okay, so the motion is Hoskins, second Ms. Stevens. All those in favor of tabling item E1 for now, we'll take it up at our next meeting. Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll give a little more time and we'll come back. Next, we have school committee approval of the CDC Healthy Youth Grant. If I could get a motion to approve for discussion purposes. Motion, Ms. McGovern. Second, Ms. Stevens. And anyone who could speak a little bit about it? I mean, there's not a whole lot
I'm sorry to say
Yeah, it's
no,
okay. I mean, it's-
unless Phil knows anything about
It's
it.
a grant. That's a good thing.
The grant is mainly for professional development purposes for health teachers around issues of sexuality, HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, that sort of thing. And it's primarily for middle and high school health teachers. And it addresses issues that are already part of our curriculum.
And the detail is in our agenda packet. So, any discussion on item F1? All hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Unfinished business. We have the 2017-2018 school budget.
Yeah, I just do want to make a couple of comments on that. You may or may not have heard, I know staff that happens to be in the audience have heard. Dr. Ajay and I decided that for the current budget year that we're in, that we were putting a freeze on spending because we're a little bit concerned on where we're trending. While we are showing a very razor-thin surplus at this point, we are working with all of the departments to make sure that we're going to get where we need to be. So we're looking to see how the month of January is going to go. We're hoping to be able to lift some of those restrictions. One, in particular, we're always concerned about the outlook in the special ed department and legal services and whatnot. So if you hear that we've frozen spending, it's not because we have a deficit, it's because we're running really, really tight, and we want to make sure we're going to make where we need to be.
Thank you. Any questions? Next, we have the 2018-2019 school budget.
Okay, so thank you. Tonight, I'd like to begin the discussion of what will become my proposal for the FY19 budget. I've already spent quite a bit of time making a presentation to all of you and to the town council about the budget challenges that we have coming up, so I'm not going to do that whole thing tonight. But I just think it's important for everyone in the public to know that this is probably the most challenging year I can remember as superintendent in dealing with the budget issues that we have to deal with. Right now, we are looking at an issue where even with a 4% increase from the town, which by law is as high as they can go, we also have to deal with a state aid reduction in the neighborhood of $550,000 to $600,000. Even though we have tuitions that are up, at least we're projecting them to go up, and we're confident that they will be in terms of Carrera Tech and Davisville Academy and that sort of thing. When all is said and done, even at the highest increase that the town could give us and that they have not gone to since the inception of this 4% rule, we would be looking at approximately a $950,000 shortfall, which would mean that to get to 4%, a really good scenario in terms of relative to the last 7 years I've been here, it would require that much in cuts. So, if you put this into perspective, every $500,000 is a percent. So with another $950,000, you're basically looking at a 6% increase. And the 6% increase is basically to do next year what we're currently doing right now. No added staff whatsoever, no added programming whatsoever. And there are a number of things that we would like to address. To Mr. Baker's point, and to the point that we just had here in December, where we talked about the very important need for behavioral support staff district-wide and at Quidnesset. I was hoping to come forward with a proposal for 2 additional social workers district-wide and at least 3 behavioral teaching assistants. On a regular basis, we've also heard from folks, I know Mrs. Bento was here tonight, who spoke eloquently last night to the commission at the State House about school start times. It's an issue that always seems to be brought to the back burner for this district, and yet we share this with a few other districts, but we're the earliest high school start time and the latest elementary school start time. And that is because the same group of buses has to make 4 runs. And just because of the geography and where we start with our buses and the cost of adding more of them, not to mention the difficulty in finding transportation workers these days, that's an issue as well. We're running into an area where we don't have enviable start times. And I know that many of you have run for these positions and want to be in a position of improving the school department and adding things that are needed and not cutting from them. So at the January 23rd meeting, I will come to you with more specifics, but those specifics will include a 4% budget, which will mean that $950,000 in cuts will be included. Some I don't think will be that difficult. I can already see a couple of areas where I may be able to find, because of just the movement of kids at an elementary school, for instance, I may need 2 sections of a particular classroom in a particular school next year instead of 3. That's a routine year-to-year thing, and that may get us a portion of the way, but not a big portion. The rest of it is, when you're talking that kind of money, you're talking bodies, teaching staff, and teaching assistants in particular. We are already as tight as we can be in terms of administrative staff, but every area is an area that we're going to have to look at when we're looking that big. We are discussing issues of the high school graduation requirements. I don't know if that's an area that is, in reducing those or in making some of them more flexible, that we find some savings. I don't see that as an absolute, next year easy savings item, because those things take 4 years to kind of cycle through when you put together new graduation requirements. But that's on the table. The other thing that's on the table is looking at particularly how we schedule our middle schools. Right now, more so at Davisville than at Wickford, but at Davisville we ascribe to the teaming model for scheduling our students, which means that at Davisville right now we have teams of approximately 95 or 100 students that are that work within the same team of teachers, 5 teachers. So those teachers include English, Math, Social Studies, and Science, and Literacy. And those teachers all know those students well and meet together about those students. It creates a better environment, we feel, for kids. And it's something that we want to do at Wickford as well, but the Wickford numbers don't really work that well just because of the number of kids in the school, the number of kids per class. If we did it at Wickford, we'd have teams of about 60 or 70 kids, and that doesn't necessarily work for efficiency's sake. So Wickford is more toward a junior high model, And what I mean by that is scheduled more like a high school, where the teams don't really exist. You take an English class with an English teacher when you're available for English and the teacher is teaching it. And a teacher may not have the same group of kids that the other teachers around that person has, but may have, 3 sections of 7th grade and 2 sections of 8th grade, for instance. That can get us some more efficiency. The option that we are looking at right now is going from a 7-period schedule at the middle schools to a 6-period schedule, where those classes would be longer. It would still have English, math, social studies, and science for students who need remedial work in either ELA or math. They would have their elective periods. The electives would run on a semester basis and not on, and that's currently the state, where electives run on a semester basis, not on a yearly basis. So essentially, during the elective times, you would be taking 2 courses over the year instead of, you take 4 courses over the year instead of 2. So you can get your English, math, social studies, and science in, but then during that elective section of classes, there would be your PE and health elective that would come into play. We also have a Spanish piece that is applicable to 8th graders right now. There would be, that's time for art. We currently have mainly in consumer science, robotics, and a lot of students take music during that time. Whether they have their strings class, their chorus, or I cover everything?
Yeah,
It's allowed, yeah.
general music as well.
General music, right.
Yep.
Yeah.
In addition to our technology classes, which generally happen to the computer lab technology, computer apps, keyboard, those are some more electives that we offer as well.
So that is not where I want to go. When I think of what I want to do to improve our school department, that's not part of the scenario, but it is becoming our reality, that we would have to make concessions like that to make all of this work. Right now, our preliminary review of going to a 6-period schedule, what we would see is a reduction in that amount of elective that is offered, and that's where the savings would come from. And we're digging into this, and we're going to continue to dig into it for the next 2 weeks, but right now we're seeing that as possibly worth about the equivalent of about 4 teachers district-wide. That does not cover $950,000. That gets us about a third of the way, maybe 40% of the way. So it's very challenging, and there's going to be a lot of work to happen to figure out where we're going to get the rest of this. What I'm researching, and I've asked Mary Ann Carroll, our attorney, to look into, is to look at what could possibly, the mechanism that would need to take place to override the 4% cap. I know that requires both this group and the town council to approve such a thing, and I know that is a majorly uphill battle. I get it. But I feel it's my responsibility as superintendent to at least explore that option and to let you know what would be involved in doing so. I implore you, and I feel we desperately need to have a conversation in this town about going far above 4%, at least for 1 year, to make some vital corrections that are needed. There's no way we can properly address the need for behavioral supports that we talked about, maybe a way to get to some better start times, and to accomplish a number of the other really important things that we would like to accomplish, the goals that you have set for me, and do that while starting with what could be cutting a dozen staff. It just doesn't make any sense. And I don't pretend to think that we could just easily make that work and nobody would notice the difference. People would notice the difference. The quality of the product would go down. So that's where we are. And so I don't know if there's any discussion on that, but I plan on coming back to you in 2 weeks with a 4% budget that shows what all of this means in terms of real cuts, and also with, as I stated, some information on the mechanism to override the 4% rule.
And just as a matter of, I guess, logistics is probably not the right word, but normally you would have gotten a really large budget package tonight. What I think I'm going to do, if everybody is in agreement, is I am going to give you that large budget package that's going to have this shortfall showing up in it. From there, we'll take whatever cuts there are that Dr. Roget forwards to you and that you approve. And the next time you will get an updated package is when we submit it to the town manager. I wasn't going to do that. I was at first going to see if there were some cuts we would come up with to try to get to that, but it's such a big number, I think it's going to take some time. And so then this way you'll at least have a lot of the detail behind what numbers are here, and then you can ask the questions, even though this will clearly not be a final budget because it has a deficit in it. So if you're in agreement with that, I'll get that out to you in the next week or so with all the by school worksheets, and then if there are any other questions that you have, I know Mr. Jones asked me personally for a couple of other details. I'm happy to provide whatever details you're looking for.
If I could just add one thing too, the issue of that 4% cap. I know that a number of districts are up against this wall right now. We predicted this when that ruling came in, and we talked about this just about in every budget presentation we've made since I've been superintendent. It's roughly around the same time when the law was enacted. I think it was around 2008, 2009. And so we've seen this coming. Last year we were all ready to roll over. Our budget was a 4% proposition. We ended up with about 3.5% from the town and made the rest of it work. It will get more and more difficult every year as far as we can see, barring some kind of miraculous adjustment in the way there's health care or, those kinds of numbers just keep going up. There doesn't seem to be a solution on the horizon. But previous to that law, in North Kingstown, you can look at the records, and the increases to the school department regularly went well over 4%. Some years as much as 8 and 9%. And it wasn't just a one-time thing, it was a year after year after year thing. I was living in North Kingstown at the time. I don't remember people revolting in the streets over those kinds of numbers. The change in that law has made the number 4 seem like artificially inflated, like it's something you would never want to go through in your wildest dreams. Previous to that law, that would have been considered a pretty good year for 4%. So, I'm not saying that we should be doing this every time, but I think there are enough things that enough of you on the council have seen as important items that need to be addressed, and that as a one-time increase, I think it is, our responsibility to address them.
Any members want to come up? I'll start off. This is clearly going to be the most challenging year since I've been on the committee. Mr. Jones, you have a little more experience than I. I've been attending school committee meetings for far longer than I've had a seat at the table. And I have seen, sitting in the audience like you folks, some really tough budget years, and I've seen what they look like, and I'm not looking forward to it. The fiscal realities are that we cannot run a deficit. We don't have the ability to, with the exception of certain limited ways, which we're doing actually some of them phenomenally well at, of raising funds separate and apart from that which is given to us from the town council. And just to refresh members of the public's memory on how the whole system works, we prepare a budget, we submit it to the town council. The town council then decides, based on the amount of money we have requested, how much money we actually get. It's usually not the same number, and it's not more than we ask for, so it's usually less, at which point we then have to balance our budget to the amount of funds that the town's given us. The big difference this year is, while our budgeting has always been tight, is we have a projected decrease in state aid, which is a substantial number. And that's putting us behind the 8 ball, from the get-go. And unfortunately, as Dr. Roget said, from where I sit here, when you say, and I don't disagree with your numbers, that we cannot take what we did this current year and do it within the budget constraints we have. What unfortunately that means is that next year we probably can't do what we do this year. And now it's up to us and you folks of the administration to come up with what we're going to not do. And unfortunately, I agree with Dr. Auger that the dollars that we're looking at are going to be noticeable. They're going to be something somewhere in a school that people have and like that may not be there. And that is before we even get into a discussion of how we address needs for things that we aren't doing right now that we clearly need to do. And that's where we're at. And it's going to be a very tough next couple of weeks and months, because after we make those decisions, people are going to start to realize what isn't there anymore, and a lot of discussion will be had about that. But we can't spend money we don't have, and that's where we're at right now. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. McGovern.
So, Dr. Auger and I always come at this from opposite points of view, and I think it's very, very important to recognize that the taxpayers of the town, 4% is a lot, because our taxes are already very, very high. And the problem that we face is, we just had a discussion about the CIP. The CIP in this town, and this is historic, it's been many, many years building to where we are now, but the reality is that if we're looking at more than 4% need for the operating budget, and we have this significant need in capital for both maintenance and actual capital projects, and the whole town capital needs an operating budget as well, in the end, we're going to see a small fraction of the capital request, which is going to be nothing more than maintenance dollars, and the rest will get pushed, to a future, to compound the future problem. I'm very pleased to hear discussions about, possibly incorporating some savings in the operations at the middle schools. I think we need to be looking at the same thing with the high school. I think it's an excellent program of studies. It's admirable, but if we're going to be asking for 6%, then maybe we need to look at every single thing and say, need versus want versus need, and pare it back to what is essential. Dealing with the behavioral issues is adding staff the only way that we can properly address these issues within law, and I know there's a lot of constraints on what can be done, but are we investigating every possibility that we, to do the best that we can for the children and to work within the budget. So, yeah, we're going to have to look, we're going to need more detail on the budget so we can look item by item before we get to the request that goes to the town.
Anyone else?
Barry, what do we, I know it's preliminary, but assumptions for charter schools and out of district?
I will have those details for you. So the issue that we have with charter schools as a whole is that they're everywhere. I feel like every year I get a new invoice on my desk from another charter school that I had never heard of. So we have the issues with our big ones, Kingston Hill Compass, the Met is a big one relatively. But we have a lot of little ones that add up to a lot. I get invoiced for the International Laborers School. We recently, the PTEC program in Westerly, we have a lot of interest in that for next year. And those are all charged just like charters. So I will provide to you the breakdown of each one of those schools, of who we have, who might be falling off because they're aging out in grade level, and then what I'm projecting. But between the charters and the career tech, we do have a lot of money going out. You know, we have career tech students going to Narragansett and Warwick and West Warwick, and so there's a lot. So I can tell you that I budgeted, there's more than what we had currently this year, because a lot of it is based on what we're seeing this year as well, and what I know of, especially in the P-Tech area. We currently have one student that we're paying for P-Tech. I've been told by our 2 middle school principals that we have 10 to 12 students who are interested in that next year. That's big dollars.
Where's that?
Newport
That's
and
Newport.
Westerly.
Yeah, the one reason I ask is, so when we sort of say doing what we did last year, some of what we do last year isn't always
Right.
the same because of special ed, unique special ed requirements that are difficult, and then obviously these choice options, which are kind of a dual-edged sword in some sense, because I would say, 5 kids who come back to the same school is a social worker. 5 schools we lose to a charter is a social worker. That's the opportunity cost of having choice. And maybe the way we've structured it isn't necessarily the best way, even if you support kind of choice options. So I tend to look at it in kind of sometimes those dimensions of the way. The other thing I would, obviously we can do, but even to the audience, is talk to your state representatives. I think, 6-7 years ago when they did the first funding formula reboot, it was phased in. It's pretty big hits, and it's a big hit for us. There's other districts taking huge hits too. And this time there appears to be no phase-in, just here it is. And I understand the state's under its own budgetary pressures, but it might be worth asking your state legislature why they're not phasing in, so we could at least smooth out these reductions over even 1, 2, or 3 year period.
And I did reach out to RIDE to ask for that consideration. Personally, I'm waiting to hear back from them, but I did take that step to ask them. $500,000 to $600,000 is easier over 3 to 5 years than it is 1 year.
It's kind of a catch-22 when the state talks about losing population and losing young people and families, to have communities where enrollment's actually growing or stabilizing, and then you get sort of punished for it in a kind of adverse way for doing that. Sometimes I think the state doesn't look at the big picture of things sometimes when it comes to that. So, thanks.
I just have a question on the 4%. So it's my understanding that the law is that a town cannot increase the tax levy by 4%.
More than, correct.
There's nothing, though, that says a town cannot award in a budget more than 4%. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
What the law says is that a school committee cannot
Okay.
present a budget to a town council that asks for more than 4%. It does not say that the town cannot give a school department more money. There are a couple of districts in the state that actually do get more.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Is it the budget, Mary, or the amount that's from the levy?
No, the levy is the town piece where they are not allowed to raise the tax levy more than 4%. But then there's another law internal to the school department, and I can forward it to everyone, that says a school committee cannot present a budget to the town council more than 4%. So they're the same kind of 4%, but
Right.
it's 2 different issues.
But, so to get to the heart of what you're saying, it would be theoretically possible for the town to reduce the town share or level fund the town based on last year's levy. That would give them more than 4% to give to the school department. From my experience, I wouldn't expect that.
No, I wouldn't either, but it would be.
Possible.
Well, the other unfortunate
Something
part
to
is that
consider.
when you see development in a town, and North Kingstown has had a lot of development, they're not getting a lot of benefit from that because they're capped at the 4% on the tax levy. So while your bill might go down $5, we've had a lot of development in the town, and they can't raise taxes any more than that number. So, we can say, oh, wow, there's a lot more people, and there's more businesses, and there's more schools, more housing, but the town doesn't always get the benefit of that because of that cap that's imposed by the state.
There are a lot of side effects to that statute that cause ripples throughout the entire budgeting process year to year in ways that I don't know if the General Assembly completely, considered when that law was passed.
Well, it's old. It's time to
Yeah,
take another look. We're going on 10 years. It's old. It's 4%. I understand maybe they had reasoning for doing it, but 4% in a 10-year time frame, 4% is kind of an arbitrary number at this point. It's something they kind of need to take a look at. Now, a town can ask to be exempted from that 4%. I don't know if anybody's done it. I don't know if anybody's ever gotten it. I think they have to go through General Assembly and all that. Greg probably knows better, but I don't think that. Yeah, I think Mary and Carol could speak to that for you.
There you go. Any other questions on the 2019 fiscal year school budget? We're only just beginning, I'm afraid. So, moving on. Next item is the CIP bond and future bond. We have request for school committee approval of the RIDE Stage 2 capital reserve funding, which is in your packet. I would ask for a motion to approve that item at this time.
So moved.
Second motion from Ms. McGovern, second Mr. Jones. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item is a first read on policy IHAQ, which is with respect to career and technical education funding. That is career and technical education. That is a first time that's been put before us, so we will not be voting on that tonight. We do 2 reads on new policies, so this is our first, and then we can vote on it after the next meeting. If anyone has any questions or any revisions that they'd like made, you can contact Dr. Ajay or people in the policy subcommittee as well. Any questions on that policy while we're on it? New business, the only items, no items under new business. We have an enrollment report for your information, as well as the current December year-to-date 2017 financial reports, check registers, and budget items. I say this a lot, but I'll say it again. When it comes to transparency, we try to do what we can. One of the things that we do that I think is about as transparent as you can be is our entire check register, with the exception of basically payroll, is published in this report here. You can see every single check the school department has written in alphabetical and numerical order. I don't know how much more detail you could ask than that, so you're welcome to go through the check register. Any questions on either the enrollment or financial reports? Okay, if not, we've reached the end of our agenda. If I could have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
The motion was Stevens. Second, Mr. Jones. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.